I am still basking in the afterglow of meeting brethren face to face. Some names that I only saw online, was never able to put a face to the name. It was a real joy and pleasure to meet those people face to face. I've learned that I'm happy for this online fellowship, and I'm glad that we have the opportunity to meet each week. But I'm telling you that meeting face to face is a completely different experience. There are things you learn about people that you just can't discover online. I mean, Sister Arthur's bright, infectious smile, Brother Matt's amiable, amicable spirit, Sister Natalie afraid of the cold water like I am, and Sister Elizabeth with her bag of medications for every ailment. I could point out something about every person that I met, and it was so warm and so genuine. It's not the same as meeting online. I was thinking about it, and it came to my mind that there is a school of thought today that what we have with the Father and His Son is something like online fellowship. There are some people who teach that He stays at a distance, He sends His angels, and He sends His words, but He is afar off. So, what we have with Him is online fellowship. It's not the same thing. And I look forward to the day when all of us can meet face to face. I am happy that what we have is true fellowship with the Father and His Son in person. The reality that this person is closer to me. The only person who is as close to me is myself. We have true fellowship with the Father and His Son. And I want us to remember and to appreciate that reality this morning. I'm going to begin by inviting the Lord's presence with us. So please bow your heads. Father, I ask that you will take charge of the proceedings, not only this morning, but for this entire day. May we be blessed, and may we learn more of you. In Jesus' name, amen. I'm going to entitle my presentation this morning, Just Like John. Just like John. I'm going to start by sharing an experience I had a few years ago when I was in the classroom. One of the things I like to do when I set my students out for break and for lunchtime, I like to put myself in inconspicuous positions and watch them what they were doing outside, because children will get into all kinds of mischief if they think you're not looking. So on one occasion I was peeping through the window and I saw a little boy sitting under a tree. This boy was in grade 4. A little fellow. At the time I was the grade 6 teacher. The grade 6 were the big students in the school. I was watching this little boy eating his lunch. I saw one of my big grade 6 students walk up behind him, and with all of his might and with full force, he kicked that little boy in his back. The food that the little boy was eating and the juice, they float out of his hand and scattered in all directions, and the little boy fell on his face. Now, when the shock and the fright wore off, all he could do, he jumped up and he started trying to fight the boy. Right? The boy was much bigger than he was, crying and flailing and throwing punches wildly in his disbelief and his frustration. While this commotion was going on, two other boys, also from my class, two big boys, I saw them running and they joined the fight. And you know what they did? They joined the fight against the little boy. So now the three of them were fighting this one little fellow. He didn't stand a chance. He was just flailing wildly, crying in disbelief and frustration, and they were just pummeling him from all sides. So I rushed down there, I broke up the fight, and I brought them into my room. So I turned to the first boy and I said, I saw what happened. I said, why did you kick this boy in his back? He said, sir, my cousin told me yesterday that he called me a punk. I said, did you hear him call you a punk? No. I sent to call the cousin. I said, did you hear this boy call your cousin a punk? No, sir. So how do you know that he did that? Somebody told me, sir. So the fight started based on a rumor, hearsay. I turned to the other two big boys. I said, why did you two join the fight? Well, sir, we saw that our classmate and our friend was fighting, so we decided to help. I said, do you know what they were fighting for? No, sir. Do you know why the fight took place? Do you know who started the fight? No, sir. So why did you join? Because it's our friend, sir. So they had no idea why the fight started. They had no clue what they were fighting for. They just knew that their friend was fighting. And they all ganged up to pummel this little boy. I said, all three of you, first of all, you are going to take the money in your pockets and you are going to hand it to this little boy. And you are going to help him to buy the most lavish lunch that he has ever bought in this school. I took their money and I gave it to the little boy. I said to him, you are free to go. Now to the other three, I said, you chose to join a fight that you knew nothing. First of all, the fight started upon false premises. You two joined the fight without knowing what it was about, who was right and who was wrong. And you chose to commit such an unfair injustice upon a little boy. I said, because you have chosen the wrong side, you are going to go down with the side that you chose. I was very upset at injustice and the unfairness of what they had done. And I'm telling you that I punished them severely, severely for what they did. The point I want to make from this story is that blind loyalty to the wrong cause will always lead you to end up in the wrong place. Blind loyalty. You have to know what you're loyal to and why you're loyal to it, or you will end up in the wrong place. We see that in so many facets of life each day. Politics is a prime example. The Democrats will defend anything that Biden does and says, the Democrats will defend it. And anything that Trump does and says, the Republicans will defend it. It's the same thing here in Jamaica. We have two political parties out here, and the current government did something recently which I consider to be one of the most corrupt and callous and unconscionable acts that a democratic government has ever committed. I'll tell you quickly what they did. The teachers who work very hard and who get paid very little in Jamaica wrangled and fought with them to get a raise. They said that we don't have enough money and the country is financially strapped. They agreed after great struggle to give them 2%, a 2% raise, a few dollars. And the 2% raise is going to be given over a 3-year period, right? Because the country is so financially strapped. A few weeks later, to the shock and the horror of the entire country, we learned that they themselves had taken a raise. Not 1%, not 2%, 250%. They had given themselves millions and millions of dollars in increase. So now the Jamaica Prime Minister, who presides over 3 million people, will be getting a salary that is on par with the US President, who presides over 350 million people, and the UK President, who presides over almost 70 million people. And this was to be paid to them. They paid it to themselves retroactively. So they were all entitled to multi-million-dollar packages. And the rationale that they gave is, if you don't pay us properly, how do you expect us to perform, right? I suppose that rationale did not apply to the hardworking teachers. But you can imagine that the entire country was outraged and infuriated at such brazen, wanton disregard for people. The thing is that when I went online and I read the comments, there were myriads of people who were saying nothing is wrong with it and they deserve it. And when I checked it out, these people were all a part of the ruling party. loyal to the point where they were incapable of seeing the corruption that their party was committing. Because blind loyalty colors your vision and it enables you to only see through the perspective of the entity to which you are loyal. I couldn't believe that people could defend that, but they did. Right? It's the same reason why Nazi Germans killed almost 6 million Jews. Blind loyalty to their country. It's the same reason why, quote unquote, Christians in the Dark Ages killed almost 60 million heretics because they were loyal to the church. It's the same reason why God did not want Israel to have a king. If you think about it, every time Israel had a good king, they followed God. And every time they had an evil king, they turned against God. You know why? Because their loyalty was not to God, it was to the king. And so if he led them into rank idolatry and paganism, they would follow him because blind loyalty always causes you to end up in the wrong place. I think one of the most typical examples of this was the Jews who lived in Jesus' days. They were the most, I think they were probably the most entitled, self-righteous, arrogant, and blindly loyal set of people to ever walk the face of the earth. Maybe barring some people today. One of the favorite sayings they had was, "We are Abraham's seed." They like to tell everybody that we are the chosen people of God. And when I say they were loyal to the point that they were deliberately dishonest. What were they loyal to? Well, they were loyal, for one, to their traditions and their systems. They believed that they had the truth, and you couldn't tell them anything else. You couldn't add to what they knew. You couldn't subtract to what they knew from what they knew. All the things that they had gotten from the prophets and their pioneers. No room or scope for change or revolutionary thinking existed in their minds. And it's the same thing that we see today in religious circles, right? Adventists, for example, will tell you that they have been given a line of truth that will take them all the way down to the coming of Christ. In other words, we know all that we need to know already. And anything outside of those parameters is heresy. Nothing to be added, nothing new to learn. Just like the Jews, they were loyal to what they already knew, what they were comfortable with, what was established. They were loyal to it. Jehovah's Witnesses won't even pray with you if you are not a part of their system. Blindly loyal. The Jews were also loyal to their leaders, the men who they believed God put in position to lead them. They followed what these men said without question and without hesitation, blindly, just like they did with the kings. As long as you are a man of God in the church, what you say is as if the word of God says it. Same thing today. How many times have you witnessed to a person? The person is listening to you, they are interested, the truth is coming across, and they go and speak to their pastor. And that is the end of that. They can no longer listen to what you say, and an opportunity is lost right there because people are loyal. Just like the Jews, they're loyal to their leaders and their pastors. The Jews were also loyal to their synagogue. They were loyal to their synagogue. This was God's church. It is the only place where God dwells. And if you are not a part of this church, you are lost. Right? They believed, like many modern Christians believe, that you must stay with the ship because it's God's ship. And if the ship is sinking, you stay with the ship. Even when it has become an enterprise that is completely obsessed with making money. Jesus referred to the temple as the Jewish temple, he referred to it as a den of thieves. They had become all about making money. Even when it has become corrupt to that point where God doesn't matter anymore. You stay with the ship no matter what. That's the attitude that we see being portrayed today. They were blindly loyal to their synagogue. And the fourth thing that I see they were loyal to is that they were loyal to Moses. Another very common saying in Israel was, Moses says. And as long as Moses says, nobody could refute that. Nobody could argue with that. Nobody could dare say it is not so. To do so was, in their eyes, akin to blasphemy. And it was something that made them so furious and enraged that they were willing to murder the Son of God because of it. That was one of the things that caused them to hate Jesus so much, right? Jesus used to say, Moses said this, but I say, he dared to contradict the things that Moses said. And that to them made him worthy of death. Now, I'm not here to mash anybody's horn or to offend anybody, but I see the same attitude being portrayed when it comes to Ellen White, not only among Adventists, but even in OTG circles. Some people have the attitude that if you question anything that Ellen White says, or if you disagree, you are now a heretic and a person to be avoided, and you are on the sure downward march to perdition. I heard one preacher very recently go as far as to excoriate those religious leaders who dare to tell their congregation that they should use the Bible only. How dare you say that? The Bible only is not enough, right? You dare to speak against Moses, you're worthy of death. If you look at the time of Jesus and the way the religious leaders were, there are so many parallels to be drawn with the attitude and the atmosphere that exists today. It's frightening, but it equates to the same thing, which is that blind loyalty to the wrong thing is always going to lead you to the wrong place. So the Jews were loyal to their leaders, to their synagogue, to their systems and traditions. They were loyal to Moses. But you know what? They were not loyal to God. They were not loyal to God. Because the Son of God was standing right in front of them in living color, truth incarnate, the wisdom of the ages, the one that Moses wrote about. And they could not see him. They could not accept the things that he was saying because they were loyal to other things, to the wrong things. And I want to look at a few examples of how this blind loyalty to the wrong things led them to not only fight against the truth that was plain before their eyes, but to blatantly and deliberately and dishonestly deny that truth. I'm going to go to John chapter 12. I'm going to read verses 42 and 43. I just want to look at a few examples here of how the loyalty of these quote unquote children of God led them to do awful things. It says, nevertheless, among the chief rulers also, many believed on him. They saw the things that this man was doing. They listened to the words that he was speaking. They knew in their hearts that this was not an ordinary period of time. This was the work of God. The truth. This was the real deal. They knew it in their hearts. And they believed on him secretly. But guess what? Because of the Pharisees, they did not confess him. Because of the Pharisees. Because they trusted in those men and because their loyalty was to those men. And these men said, listen, this is not of God. So that was good enough for them. What else was the reason? Lest they should be put out of the synagogue. They were afraid of losing their church membership. So they chose instead to deny and to reject the truth. Because their loyalty was to church membership and to church leadership. Right? Verse 43 damns them. It says, for they love the praise of men more than the praise of God. Their loyalty was to the wrong thing, and so it led them to the wrong place. The same idea is portrayed in John chapter 7. I'm going to read a few verses here. So they fought against Jesus at every turn. At every step of his ministry, they came up with every possible way to obstruct him and to fight against him. On this occasion, they sent officers to arrest him. Now, verse 44, it says, and some of them would have taken him, but no man laid hands on him. Then came the officers to the chief priests and Pharisees, and they said unto them, why have ye not brought him? The officers answered, never man spake like this man. We went to arrest him, but when we heard the things that the man was saying, they were so wonderful and so unspeakably beautiful that we could not touch the man. We heard these words and we know in our hearts that it was the truth. We couldn't touch him. And so, the Pharisees and the chief priests use a method that many religious leaders use today. Little groups that are not affiliated with them, you know what they do? They castigate those groups publicly and they label them. They label them as offshoots. They label them as sects and they label them as cults. Dangerous people to be avoided. And they speak of them in this way publicly. And the members of the congregants who cannot think for themselves and who are loyal to the church and to the pastor, they love the praise of God, of men, more than the praise of God. And so they don't want to be labeled with these people. It doesn't matter if they have heard what these people stand for or not. The Pharisees used the same method. Then answered them the Pharisees in verse 47. Are you also deceived? Are you also going to be led astray by these people? Are you among those who believe this nonsense? They use fear to control the people. Verse 48. Have any of the rulers or of the Pharisees believed on him? Have any of the learned men who have their doctorates and their PhDs and who know Greek and Latin and have their doctors of divinity and have studied in university all these years and know the law, have any of those people believed on him? Has the Sanhedrin ratified what he's saying? Has the General Conference endorsed his teachings? None of us are in agreement. All of us know that what he's doing is false, but you ignorant people who know nothing, you are cursed. Who are you to decide what is true and what is not? What they are in effect saying to these men is, your loyalty must be to us, not to your own common sense and your own eyes and your own thinking and your own prayer. It must be to us. We don't believe in him, so you shouldn't either. That is what they were saying. And because the people were loyal to them and to the system and to the church, you know what? They allowed them to lead them astray to commit the ultimate act, as we will see later on. It was these religious leaders, the chief priests and the Pharisees. Look how many times you see this phrase come up, and you will see that they are the ones who led the people to commit the most heinous act in Jewish history because they were loyal to these men. Now, one of the worst things that I think I've ever read in the Bible, when I was looking at it, I thought, this has to be one of the worst things. I'm going to tell you what it is. Now, in my opinion, one of the most mighty miracles that Jesus ever did was the resurrection of Lazarus. It might sound odd for you to hear me say that because Jesus raised many people from the dead. In fact, Elijah and Elisha also raised the dead. But the resurrection of Lazarus was different. If you take a rat, a dead rat or a dead cat and throw it outside, just do that and leave it for 4 days and you will see what happens. The stench will be overpowering. Everybody knows that if a man has been dead for 4 days, he's going to stink. You see, why this is important? Why is this important? Today, there have been people, to my surprise, I discovered that there have been people who have actually been able to fake resurrections, right? They have medications that they can give to you drugs which put you in such a catatonic state that your pulse stops beating, your heart stops beating, you stop breathing, and for all intents and purposes, you are dead. And then they have other drugs now which they can use to revive you and bring you back out of that state. And using this method, a lot of false prophets have been able to fake the act of resurrection. Even in Haiti, they say that, I've heard legends of zombies in Haiti. And apparently there is some truth to it. They say that the voodoo doctors have certain herbs that they mix together which can put people in a similar catatonic state, sometimes for days, and then they have a way of bringing them out of it. So even raising the dead is something that false prophets have faked. Nobody can do it, however, when a man has been dead for 4 days. Nobody can do it except God. So when Jesus came and stood in front of the tomb of Lazarus, there was no ambiguity as to whether he was dead or not. There was no way to fake that. When he ordered them to roll the stone away, every man and woman who was standing on that spot knew that he was dead. The stench told them in no uncertain terms. They had to cover their noses immediately. Right? The stench was so palpable that it was stinging even their eyes. Nobody could say this is a trick. And when Jesus called this dead man from his grave, and the man stepped out still wrapped in grave clothes, that stench within a few seconds was gone completely. Right? Now, even the hard-headed Jews knew that Satan cannot raise the dead. Everybody at that spot knew this has to be the hand of God. Nobody else could do this. The news spread like wildfire among the Jews, and many of them started believing on him. It got to the ears of the chief priests and the Pharisees now, the learned ones with their doctorates and their PhDs. It got to their ears. And you would think they would say, no, wow, this cannot be fake. This is of God. But the Bible says something that is very sad instead. Very sad and very terrible. In John chapter 13, verses 10 and 11, look what it says. It says, but the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death. A man comes back from the dead. Why would you want to kill him again? This should be a national treasure. This should be a medical marvel. Why would you want to kill that man? Why? Look at why. Because that by reason of him, many of the Jews went away and believed on Jesus. What a dishonest and stubborn and blind set. So because they were losing members, their church membership was being affected, it was more expedient for them to try to murder the man that was brought back to life in such a miraculous way, rather than to accept the truth of Jesus. My father used to tell me as a boy growing up that there is none so blind as he who will not see. They refused to see the truth. And even when it was staring them in the face, because they were loyal to their system and their church and their pastors, they chose to lie about it blatantly and deliberately instead. And one of the things that I've learned as I've grown in my Christian experience is that that Satan has to fight against truth. He has to. Because truth, real truth, is the greatest assault on his kingdom that is possible. If I go around teaching that God is going to roast people forever in hell, Satan is not worried about that. He's not going to trouble me for that, because that is not the truth. But truth, real truth, is an assault on his kingdom, and he cannot just sit idly back and allow it to happen. So he's going to attack it. So anywhere you see the truth, you're going to see persecution. You're going to see fight back. And in many cases, you know where the fight back is going to come from? It's going to come from the religious people. The ones who are loyal to their synagogue and to their leaders and to Moses. because they are the ones who truth threatens the most. I went to the camp meeting with my father a few weeks ago. And when we arrived, we understood that there were certain religious leaders who forbade their followers from attending the camp meeting because he was going to be there. They didn't want them to hear. One of them went so far as to try to influence the organizers to uninvite him from coming. You know, when I heard that first, I was very annoyed and irritated about it. But then I thought that is nothing, right? Look at what the chief priests and the Pharisees did to Jesus for the entire 3.5 years that he was there. Jesus raised a man who was rotting, brought him back from the dead, and that wasn't good enough to convince them that this was the work of God. They fought against it, and in fact, they plotted to kill the man in order to suppress the truth. Because that is what Satan has to do. He can't do any better. So we should not be surprised. And in fact, we should expect these things when we are presenting the truth. Blind loyalty will always lead to the wrong place. I want to continue looking at a few more verses, which I consider these to be an indictment against the entire Jewish system. The Bible says the sins of the fathers are visited on the children. The law of consequence exists. And I believe that a lot of the things that the Jewish nation are still experiencing today probably is just a continuation of what they did to the Son of God. So, John chapter 18, I'm just going to read a few verses here and comment as I go along. They bring Jesus to Pilate. They finally get what they want. And they have him in their power. So Pilate says in verse 29, "What accusation bring ye against this man?" They answered and said unto him, "If he were not a malefactor, we would not have delivered him up unto thee." Notice they have no crime that they can mention. All they said that, listen, if he wasn't a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him. Pilate says, what crime has he committed? If he wasn't a criminal, we wouldn't have brought him. There's nothing they can call against him. Then Pilate said unto them, "Take ye him and judge him according to your law." The Jews therefore said unto him, "It is not lawful for us to put any man to death." So here we see the ultimate objectives of these men all along. There were certain things that the Jews could do by law, right? Because as you know, they were under Roman rulership. I suppose they could have taken Jesus and they could have imprisoned him, they could have scourged him, they could have maybe put him in stocks or whatever. This was not what they wanted. The reason they brought him to Pilate is because the Romans are the only ones who could execute a death sentence. So they were making it clear, we haven't brought him here for any of those little petty punishments. What we want is his death. That is why we have brought him to you. Right? And Pilate never wanted to kill Jesus. He never wanted to do it. In John chapter 19, verse 12, it says just as much. It says, "And from thenceforth Pilate sought to release him." Even a pagan, corrupt Roman politician could look at Jesus and in a few minutes he could decide, this man is innocent. He has done nothing wrong. I want to release him. But the Jews, the leaders and the chiefs of the church cried out saying, "If thou let this man go, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whosoever maketh himself a king speaketh against Caesar." Do you see the dirty politics that they are willing to play now? Many times we think that Pilate is the one who killed Jesus. Pilate is not the one who killed Jesus. Pilate simply executed the sentence, the legal sentence. The Bible says Pilate wanted to release Jesus. They corner him. Look at what they are saying to him. They said, listen, this man claims to be a king. Caesar is the only king. So anybody else who claims that is committing treason, if you allow this man to go free, we are going to make sure that Caesar hears about it and you will have to answer to him for supporting treason. They cornered Pilate. After they said that, Pilate had no choice in the matter, right? These are the ones who orchestrated his death. And they were willing to play dirty to do it. John chapter 19, verses 14 and 15. And it was the preparation of the Passover, and about the 6th hour, and he said unto the Jews, Behold your king. But they cried out, Away with him, crucify him. Pilate said unto them, Shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered and said, Notice who answered again. The chief priests answered and said, We have no king but Caesar. The entire Jewish nation hated Caesar bitterly. They hated him, but they were willing to embrace him and to pretend to be loyal to him and display this level of hypocrisy if it meant they could kill him. They were okay with that. They were okay with choosing a murderer and a thief, one who was known to be a criminal, because he didn't threaten their religious system. He didn't threaten their beliefs and systems. They were willing to take him instead of an innocent man who was teaching him the truth. And it was all orchestrated by the chief priests who were loyal to the wrong thing. Matthew chapter 27, verses 19 and 20. As I said, I'm just rushing through a few verses here and commenting on them. When Pilate sat down on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, Have thou nothing to do with that just man? For I have suffered many things in this day in a dream because of him. But who? The chief priests and elders persuaded the multitude. How? This same multitude that had seen Jesus raise the dead, heal the blind, feed 5,000 people. These same people that had seen the wondrous acts that he did for themselves. How could the chief priests and the elders persuade them to ask for Barabbas? How is that possible? Because the people were loyal to the church and to the leaders and to the system. And when you're loyal to something, it colors your vision and prevents you from seeing the truth when you're loyal to the wrong thing that is. So again, they are the ones who persuaded the people. Matthew 27, verses 62 to 64. Now the next day that followed the day of the preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, After 3 days I will rise again. Command therefore that the sepulchre be made sure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away and say unto the people, He is risen from the dead. So the last terror shall be worse than the first. Imagine that. They have achieved their objective. They have accomplished their ultimate dream, and they have murdered the Son of God. They have gotten him out of the way. The man is in his grave, and they are not satisfied with that. They are not content with that. They come to Pilate and they ask him to put guards around the tomb. Even in his grave, they cannot leave the man in peace. They fight against truth, even when the Son of God is dead. This is how devious and conniving and blind these people are. So Pilate complies and he puts the guards at the tomb. And then something amazing and miraculous and supernatural happens. A mighty, terrific being descends from the heavens, full of the glory of God the Father. And he stands at the tomb of Jesus and he calls the Son of God back to life. The man that was dead comes out of the grave, alive and well. And the soldiers that are guarding the tomb, they see it. There was a great earthquake. They tremble like leaves. They have seen something that nobody has ever seen before. And in terror and trembling, they run to the city. Of course, everybody that they see, they want to tell what just happened. Matthew 28 verses 11 to 15. It says, now when they were going, behold, some of the watch came into the city and showed unto the chief priests. They come to the church leaders all the things that were done. So they tell the leaders, listen, we were at the tomb and an angel came down from heaven and raised him from the dead. We saw it with our own two eyes. It was the most wonderful, terrifying thing we have ever seen. This is not fake. And when they were assembled with the elders and had taken counsel, the chief priest said, well, this evidence is enough to convince us that this man is the Son of God. Now we see that what he said all along was true. Is that what they do? They gave large money unto the soldiers, saying, say ye his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept. Wow, boy oh boy. The level of dishonesty, the level of lying that these men are capable of, the measures to which they go to hide and suppress the truth is unbelievable. The men tell them what they see with their very eyes, and they bribe the men to lie about it. Instead of believing the truth that is plain before their eyes, they pay money for the men to lie about it. And in addition to that, they say, listen, don't worry about Pilate hearing about it. If it comes to his ears, we will bribe him and deal with him for you and make sure you are safe. They are worse than modern day politicians because their loyalty was to their system and to their leaders. When I read this story, it's a graphic illustration of the point I want to make. Loyalty to the wrong thing will ultimately lead to the wrong place. And these chief priests and these Pharisees, you know where they will end up? Revelation chapter 1 and verse 7 says something very interesting. You know, the first resurrection, as we understand it, when Jesus comes back the second time, it's going to be to call his children to himself. The dead, the wicked dead, are not going to come back until after the millennium. But something special is going to happen during this first resurrection that includes these chief priests and Pharisees. Look at what Revelation chapter 1 and verse 7 says. It says, behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him. How many men pierced Jesus? It probably took one soldier to nail his hands and his feet to the cross. Probably took another one to drive the spear into his side. So when it says they also which pierced him, it's not talking about these 2 or 3 soldiers. In fact, the soldiers are not really the ones who pierced Jesus. They only carried out the sentence. When it says those who pierced him, it's talking about all of these people who were involved in scheming and plotting and conniving to destroy him. Even in the face of overwhelming truth, the Bible says they are going to come back in the first resurrection, and they are going to see. They are coming back for one purpose, to see him. In fact, this is supported in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 64. Jesus speaking to Caiaphas says, thou hast said, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Jesus promised Caiaphas that he would see him coming back. All of them who were loyal to the wrong thing, they are going to come back on the day of judgment, and they are going to see this majestic being coming in the clouds of heaven, surrounded by millions of angels. And they are going to know that this is the God of the ages. In fact, he is the one who created every single one of those angels. And in the midst of the dazzling majesty and glory, they are going to be allowed to see his face, and they are going to realize that this is the person that they plotted and schemed against. This is the one who they refused to believe. And this was truly the Son of God. And what a terrible and dreadful moment it's going to be for them to realize what they could have had and what they sacrificed because they were too dishonest and too blinded by loyalty to the wrong thing to see the truth. It's going to be a terrible moment. And Jesus is bringing them back not because he wants revenge, not because he wants to rub it in their face. He's bringing them back because it must be a witness to them that what he said was true. Now I realize my time is going, so let me hurry along here now. Now, I want to show you that even the disciples of Jesus were loyal to the wrong thing. Even the disciples of Jesus. And because of that loyalty to the wrong thing, they ended up in the wrong place. I want to show you this. In Matthew chapter 26, I'm going to read from verse 31. Then said Jesus unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. But after I'm risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. Peter, always the fastest on the draw, answered and said unto him, though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. What Peter is saying to Jesus is, listen, I am loyal to you. Even if everybody else is disloyal, I am loyal. Jesus said unto him, verily I say unto thee that this night before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise also said all the disciples. All of them declared to Jesus, we are loyal to you, Master. We will never leave you. This is what they said with their mouths. But look what happens a few hours later. When Jesus is faced with the great crisis and the mob comes for him to destroy him. Verse 56. But all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. Then all the disciples, all of them who had declared a few hours before that they were loyal and they would never leave him, all of them who had walked with him for 3.5 years in good times and bad times, all of them fled and forsook him in his hour of greatest need. Why? Why in that moment you run away and leave him? Didn't you just say you were loyal to him? And they that had laid hold on Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter, the one who had declared in the strongest terms his loyalty, Peter followed him afar off unto the high priest's palace, and went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the question I have is this. Were the disciples loyal to Jesus or not? And my answer would be yes and no. You see, they were loyal to Jesus to an extent, but the loyalty was divided because they were also loyal to themselves and their own safety. Those of us who understand a little bit about mob mentality, I don't understand it, but I've seen it in play. When a mob comes to accomplish something, they're all thinking the same way, they're all driving each other. And if you stand up to oppose that mob, let's say they have come to kill somebody and you stand up to speak against it, you know what is likely to happen? In many cases, they end up killing you also. So what most people will do when they see a mob is they will stand aside and keep quiet. Today they will video it while it's taking place. But you are in danger if you stand up against them to support the cause that they are against. So when the disciples fled, it wasn't a matter of them just being cowards. Their very lives were in danger. The people came for Jesus and they were saying, listen, these men are with him too. Let's take them also. Their safety was under threat. And Peter followed from a distance because he knew that if he get close, his safety would be an issue. And he was loyal to himself and his own safety was important to him. So he stayed at a distance and the others ran away in self-preservation. In addition to that, Jesus was now the underdog. For 3.5 years, he had walked the land of Palestine and the wonders that he had performed. Sometimes Jesus couldn't even find a place to walk. He was so surrounded by the mob. He was famous. People marveled at the things he did. Many, even people from the Sanhedrin came to him to speak to him. He was famous. Everybody knew about this man. And you know what? When somebody is famous and things are going well for that person, it is easy to follow that person. Just ask people like Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Cosby, R. Kelly. When you're on top of the world, everybody wants to bask in your light and be a part of your fame and what you're experiencing. But the minute that that disappears, you will see how fast friends desert you. As I said, ask Bill Cosby and Jeffrey Epstein and people like that. These were all great men in the world, and as soon as scandal arose around their name, everybody abandoned them. It was the same thing with Jesus now. The whole nation of Israel had one objective in mind. They were possessed with devils, I have to say, and that was to destroy this man. He was a shame and disgrace, and to be associated with him meant that you were a shame and disgrace also. And the disciples were loyal to their own reputations. So they could not afford to go and stand with Jesus and say, I stand with this man, because it was harmful to their own reputations, not only their safety, but their reputation as well. The way verse 58 ends is very instructive to me. It says, Peter sat with the servants to see the end. What does that mean? You know what Peter was doing? Peter followed Jesus at a distance to see how things would turn out. If Jesus was somehow miraculously exonerated, all Peter was going to do is to go back and follow him. But if things took a turn for the worst, by keeping himself at a distance, he could make a strategic exit and preserve himself at the same time. So Peter's loyalty to Jesus was situational. He was loyal to Jesus on condition that things went well. And it was the same with all of the apostles. So their loyalty was divided. And in that moment, when he needed them the most, it was tested and proven. Every single one of them who had promised that I will be loyal to you abandoned him and left him. Except one. Except one. I used to wonder why John was called that disciple whom Jesus loved. You know, if I have a class of students and I say, that is the student who I love, there must be a reason. There must be something about that student that makes him stand out, that sets him apart from the rest, that endears him to my heart. I, I, John, Peter, James, and John were special among the other three. Jesus took them with him on special missions, right? But even among those three, John was different. John stood out. And when I asked myself the question, what made John stand out like this? The only thing I can conclude is to go to that verse that we all know, that we have all quoted many times. But it gives the greatest insight into how John was and to why John loved Jesus the way he did and why John was so loyal. There was leaning on Jesus' bosom, that disciple whom Jesus loved. One of the things I experienced when I was teaching in primary school is that the smaller children, the primary school children, they are very affectionate. Every day you go to school, they want to hug you. They want to hug you. But as a male teacher, I had to be very careful in how I operated, because some of these the bigger girls especially, some of them had already started going through puberty. Their bodies were changing. Sometimes they would run to hug me, and as a teacher, you cannot reject them and turn them away. What I would do is I would turn my side. I would give them a side-on hug, right? We would hug shoulder to shoulder. I wouldn't allow them to come into my bosom, right? Because sometimes they would come and they would hang on to you. Understanding the way the world works and how things are in this present society, I had to be very careful. But when I'm hugging my son, I hold him as close to my bosom as possible, because a bosom embrace is the most affectionate, endearing display. When the Bible says John leaned on Jesus' bosom, do you think he was resting his hand on Jesus' bosom or his elbow? No, I don't think so. I think John's head was resting on Jesus' bosom. And this picture encapsulates the way John felt about Jesus. He loved him. He loved him. And that love did not stop there. That love manifested itself in a loyalty to Jesus that the other disciples did not have. The mob came for Jesus, and every one of them ran away and left him, except John. John walked with him despite the threat to his safety. You are associating yourself with this man when your safety is under threat. You know why? Because John was not loyal to his safety. He was loyal to Jesus. John followed him and he walked with him all the way with the mob into the judgment hall. He identified himself at the door and he walked into the judgment hall and he stood beside him. When they were spitting on him and hitting him, when he was the most disreputable figure, John stood beside him and he said, I am his disciple. John was not worried about his reputation. He was loyal to Jesus. When Jesus was famous and everybody wanted to be around him, John was loyal to him. And know that he was the scourge and the disgrace, infamous. Nobody had anything good to say about him. John was loyal to Jesus. John's loyalty was not based on what the other disciples did. I want you to notice that. All the rest of them ran away. John was willing to turn away from them and disagree with them and do the opposite of what they were doing, because his loyalty was to Jesus. John was willing to follow Jesus to death. And in fact, that's what he did. When the Son of God was hanging naked, embarrassed, disgraced, maligned, hanging from the tree, all the 11 disciples were nowhere to be found, but John was there. And I am sure that when Jesus looked down from the depths of despair, if the Father had left him, nobody was there for him, he saw John. He saw his friend. One person at least was loyal to him. One person refused to leave him in the moment when he needed him the most. Jesus was glad for John. John's loyalty was not to himself. It was not to his safety. It was not to his reputation. It was not situational. It was not based on what the rest of his brethren did. He was loyal to Jesus and he followed him to the cross. No wonder Jesus loved him. No wonder Jesus loved him. And I find it instructive that I'm a little over your time, but I'll wrap up very shortly. I ask myself the question, Revelation is one of, now that we're learning about Revelation, I've come to realize that Revelation is the greatest book in the Bible when it comes to understanding the work that Christ is doing in his church from Calvary to the end of time. In fact, even after the millennium. It's the greatest book in the Bible. Now, Paul is the most prolific writer in the Bible. Paul has written some of the most wonderful books. Have you ever asked yourself why Paul wasn't the one who was given revelation? Have you ever asked yourself that? There's a reason why John was given this special privilege. He was the one disciple who was loyal to Jesus at the time when Jesus needed him the most, the one who refused to abandon him, the one who chose to bear this grace and infamy and threat to his safety rather than let Jesus go. And no wonder he was given that privilege. No wonder he was called that disciple whom Jesus loved. Now I say all of this, and I want to make the point that the last set of people on earth, the people who will vindicate the kingdom of God, The people who will bind the scapegoat and lead him away forever. The 144,000 will be just like John. Look at what Revelation chapter 14 verse 4 says about the 144,000. We all know the verse. It says, these are they which were not defiled with women. We all know what that means. The 144,000 are not going to be loyal to any denomination or church. They don't care about Seventh-day Adventists or Jehovah's Witness. They don't care about AOTG or even Open Face. Their loyalty is not to denomination. The 144,000 will not be loyal to pastors and leaders and learned men, no matter how enlightened these men are, no matter how educated these men are. The 144,000 is not going to be loyal to any particular writer. They are not going to be loyal to Uriah Smith, Jones and Waggoner, Ellen White. I'm even going to go as far as to say they are not going to be, ultimately their loyalty is not even to the Bible. If Abraham's ultimate loyalty was to the Bible, he would not have carried his son to Moriah to murder him. Their ultimate loyalty is not even to the Bible. You know what their loyalty is to? You know who their loyalty is to? These are they which follow
Jesus.
the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. They follow the Lamb. They follow him in the midst of a murderous, bloodthirsty mob. They follow him into the judgment hall to face prelates and kings. They follow him when their reputation is at stake. They follow him when their safety is at risk. They follow him when their husband and wife and mother and father and brother and sister turn against him. They follow him when it is not popular to do so. They follow him to the cross itself if necessary. One thing and one thing only is their objective. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. The 144,000 will be just like John. If I was ever any of the disciples, I would have wanted it to be John, the one who was loyal to Jesus, even when his brethren, the ones who were closest to him, left him, even when they abandoned him. John refused to leave his side. And this kind of blind loyalty, this unwavering, this unfaltering dedication to this one person, you know what? That is the key to the binding of the dragon once and for all. That is the blind loyalty that the 144,000 will have, which will help them to bind the dragon once and for all. This is where I'm going to stop this morning. But I hope that what I've been trying to say has come across. I'm sorry to have overstepped my time. Loyalty to Jesus is the only thing that is the right thing. Anything that does not fit within the parameters of that loyalty must be cut off and it must be abandoned. This is true Christianity, and this is the true strength of the last generation on this earth. So I thank you, brothers and sisters, for listening. I enjoyed being with you again after such a long time, and I hope that we will continue to be blessed throughout the remainder of the day. I'm just going to ask you to bow your heads with me as I close in prayer.